Hey everybody, welcome to week 4. So what I want to do in this video is just briefly go over neurons and their structure with you. So the reason why we care for neurons in psychology is because these little guys basically make everything happen. Without neurons, human behaviors and our mental processes probably look a lot different. Uh, so they serve a lot of different functions, but primarily what neurons do is that they process information, they take that information and then turn it into an electrical signal and then transmit that. And through the transmission of these electrical signals, communication happens throughout your body. So really, neurons are really important for the communication that goes on throughout the nervous system. These are the basic units of the central nervous system. All right, so what that means is anytime your brain or different areas in the brain want to communicate with each other, neurons make that happen. If your brain wants to communicate to different areas of your body, right, like your different organs or the muscles or different glands, or vice versa, if your body wants to communicate with your brain, that happens through neurons. So your body sends a tremendous amount of information to your brain through our five senses, and so neurons, that generally just happens through these neurons. So they're very, very important. And if we really want to understand human behavior, we kind of have to understand neurons. And so it's a good idea to understand the neuron, their structures, what they do, not just for knowledge's sake, but also this week you're going to be building your own 3D model of a neuron. And so this way you kind of have a better idea of what it is that you're putting together. So we're going to start out with the very first part, which are the dendrites. And dendrites are these areas that kind of come out of the main cell body. I always say they kind of look like tree branches growing out of a tree. And you can think of the dendrites as kind of the ears of the neuron. They kind of sit there and they wait for that information. Remember, we said neurons process information, and so information is captured by these dendrites. So they're just sitting there and listening and waiting for a message to come in. And once that message comes in, it gets picked up in these dendrites. Right? So anytime your brain is trying to send a message, it doesn't matter if it's raise your hand or kick your leg or whatever the message is that your brain's trying to send to the rest of your body, that message gets sent and it's picked up in the dendrites of the neurons. All right, so that message kind of floats in, attaches to one of these dendrites, then this neuron becomes active and is like, oh, okay, I know what the message is. So the dendrites are kind of the ears, if you will, of the neuron. The soma is the cell body. Very boring for us in psychology. I mean, it's a very important part and structure of the neuron and all of that, but for us, all you need to know is that the soma is the cell body of the neuron. All right. Next up is the axon. The axon may be the most important structure of the neuron, because this is where that electrical signal is created and then shot through, and then it moves on to the next neuron. So you can almost think of the axon as like a barrel of a gun. You load in a bullet, pull the trigger, that bullet starts to accelerate through the barrel, and then once it's gone, and then you reload, next bullet's up, next message is basically ready to go and fire through the axon. So the axon is where this neural impulse is created, and then it shoots through the axon. Because it's an electrical signal, this process happens really, really fast. And so the axon is quite possibly the most critical part of a neuron. If this part is damaged, and it can't be repaired, then basically what happens is the neuron is no longer functional, and then the brain doesn't keep it around. So you got to remember, the brain's a very efficient organ, and so it's not going to keep around things that don't work. It's not going to waste resources on neurons that are not working. And so what ends up happening is that neuron basically just dies off. So axon is very important. Dendrites can get damaged. Even these axon terminals over here can get damaged. Dendrites can get damaged. Neurons can kind of grow new dendrites, or they can make them longer and modify them. Same thing with the axon terminals. They can kind of repair them, grow new ones, make them longer or shorter depending on what the neuron needs, but the axon really can't be replaced. And so what happens once the axon is damaged, that's it. The neuron is basically done as well. And we see this in disorders like Alzheimer's. So one of the things that happens in Alzheimer's is that disease, for whatever reason, tangles up the axon. So instead of it being all nice and uniform and kind of organized, it gets all kinds of tangled up. And so because it's kind of an electrical signal, it just crashes into other areas of the axon or whatnot, and so that message never makes it to where it needs to go. And then the brain looks at the neuron and is like, oh, well, this isn't a functioning neuron, let's get rid of it. And then you have these neurons and basically brain cells just die out because of this entanglement. All right, so the axon, very, very important. One thing that you can't see on this image is the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath kind of looks like little bubbles that grow around the axon. And really all it is just kind of a fatty substance that grows all the way around the axon. It's like little bubbles, and you can look this up. Your book has a pretty good image of this. But if you Google neuron, you'll see these little bubbles that kind of grow around the axon. And it'll serve myelin serves kind of two purposes. One, it protects the axon from getting damaged. Remember, the axon is a really important structure, and so we want to protect that structure. And that's what the myelin does. It's a fatty kind of substance that grows around the axon, provides some extra cushioning, provides some extra guard, provides some extra structure so that axon doesn't get damaged. The second thing that myelin does is, because it's a fat, it's a really good conductor of electricity. And so these electrical neural signals, the more myelin you have, the faster they can shoot through this axon. So the more myelin that surrounds the axon, the quicker and faster those neural impulses can be sent. And speed's really important because the faster you can send a message, the faster you can reload and then send another, and then another, and then another, and then another, right? Again, think of it in terms of like a gun metaphor. If you shoot off a bullet and then you have to manually put that bullet in and cock the gun and all of that, that's going to take you a lot longer than if you could just automatically pop, 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 right? And that's what myelin does. It makes the axon move really, really quickly, and in terms of the information in the axon, to shoot through the axon really, really fast. Now you're ready for the next one, and then that one shot off, boom, gone, next one, boom, gone, next one, right? So the myelin makes that process a lot faster than it already is. It's already a really fast process, but myelin makes it quicker. And what's interesting is when we're first born, our neurons are kind of naked. The axons are naked. There's no myelination around our axons when we're first born. As you get older, right? So once you reach 5, a little bit more myelin starts to form around the axons. Then when you hit age 10, a little more myelin is now there. And then once you're a teenager, even more. And once you're in your 20s, even more myelin starts to grow around those axons. And so and think about it, right? You think about a newborn baby, like they can't process a lot of information. Like if I think they say the attention span of a newborn baby is maybe 5 to 10, maybe 15 seconds. That's all in terms of their attention. They just can't process that much information. But then you compare that to like a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old's a little bit better. They're still, their attention span's still pretty short, can't process a lot of information. Compared that to a teenager, right? They can process a lot more information. Their attention span is a little bit higher. Still not great, right? Not perfect, or at least not maxed out. Then when you get to like a 25 and a 35-year-old, right now, all of a sudden attention span's a lot longer. We can process a lot more information. And one of the reasons that we think this happens, we kind of credit that to this myelin sheath development, that as you get older, more and more myelin wraps around the axon, which makes information a lot faster. It can make the information a lot faster in terms of how it travels, and you can process more information and all of that. So we kind of credit our cognitive development in terms of the skills and the things that we can do as we age up to this development of the myelin sheath. All right. And last but not least are the axon terminals. Sometimes they're referred to as axon buttons. People call them terminal buttons. I always call them terminal buttons because that's kind of how it was taught to me, but we're talking about the same thing. And the axon terminals, or the terminal buttons, if the dendrites are the ears of the neuron, then you can think of the axon terminals as basically being the mouth of the neuron. So this is, the message is received in the dendrites, it's turned into a neural impulse or an electrical signal which shoots down the axon, and then that message is released in these little terminal buttons. And then what happens to the message is it's either received by the next neuron's dendrites, or depending on where that message is going, if it's going to some kind of muscles because it's controlling something, or it's going to an organ, or it's going to uh, some kind of a gland, or one of your five senses, or vice versa. If your five senses are sending information to the brain and it finally gets to the area of the brain that it needs to, then that message is received in that area, and then whatever the outcome is occurs, whether that's a behavior, whether the outcome is some kind of a mental process. Once that message is then released and it gets to wherever it needs to go, it can be executed. So in terms of the flow of information, it's always going to run this way. It's always going to go enter from the dendrites, shot through the axon, and then is released in the axon terminals, or the terminal buttons. And now there are a bunch of different neurons in our nervous system. There's bipolar neurons, there's sensory neurons, there's motor neurons, and so they all kind of look a little bit different, but the majority of the neurons have these basic structures. So the majority of all neurons are going to have dendrites, they're going to have an axon, and they're going to have some axon terminals and some myelin as well to protect the axon. Those are kind of the basic structures of all neurons. Even if they look a little bit different, even if their purpose is completely different. You have neurons that are responsible just for transmitting sensory information. You have neurons that are responsible for when your brain is trying to communicate with the rest of your body to execute certain movements. Those would be motor neurons. Even though they're different in shape and size and the way they look and their function, they all have the very same kind of basic structures. So I hope this video kind of helps in terms of the neuron and its structure and their function. As always, if you have any questions about this, please feel free to email me, get in touch with me. Thank you for watching.